The morning sun stretched soft fingers across the quiet street where she stood on her porch breathing in the new day. She had worked 20 years for this moment, this house, this patch of earth she could call her own. Every shingle, every brick, every blade of grass in her small front garden represented sacrifice, early mornings, late nights, saying no to dinners out, saying yes to overtime. She was a judge now, but she remembered every step it took to get here. She remembered sleeping on a cousin's couch while studying for the bar exam. She remembered her mother pressing $20 into her hand with a look that said, "I have no more, but take this anyway." She remembered promising herself that one day she would own a home where her family could gather, where her nieces could chase fireflies, where she could sit on her own porch without asking permission. Her porch was her favorite place. She had painted the floorboards a gentle gray that reminded her of river stones. She arranged flower pots along the railing, not in perfect symmetry but in a way that felt alive. Purple petunias tumbled over the edges of one pot. Bright red geraniums stood tall in another. A small ceramic frog sat nestled between them, a gift from her youngest niece, who had carefully wrapped it in 3 layers of newspaper before handing it over with serious eyes. This was not just decoration. This was memory. This was love made visible. She sipped her coffee, watching a sparrow hop along the fence line. The neighborhood was quiet, orderly, the kind of place people moved to when they wanted peace. Oak Haven Heights had tree-lined streets and mailboxes that matched, and rules about everything from trash can placement to holiday decorations. She had read the Homeowners Association guidelines carefully before signing the papers. She understood rules. Her whole career was built on understanding rules, and more importantly, understanding why they existed. The first note came 3 days after she moved in. It was tucked under her welcome mat, a printed sheet with bold letters at the top: HOA notice of non-compliance. The issue: her flower pots. Specifically their placement on the porch, which according to Section 4 Paragraph B might create visual inconsistency with neighboring properties. She read it twice, then placed it in a folder labeled Important Papers. She did not remove the pots. They were on her property within the boundaries of her lot, as clearly shown in the survey documents she kept in a fireproof box. The rules did not actually forbid porch flowers. They mentioned maintaining curb appeal but left the interpretation open. She knew the difference between a rule and someone's opinion dressed up as a rule. 2 days later a woman appeared at the edge of her property. She stood perfectly straight, hands clasped in front of her, wearing crisp linen pants and a polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on the pocket. Her hair was cut in a sharp bob that did not move when she turned her head. "Those flower pots need to go," the woman said without greeting. She remained on her porch holding her coffee mug. "Good morning," she said. "I'm sorry, but the covenants allow porch decorations as long as they don't obstruct walkways or violate safety codes. These are on my porch, which is part of my private property." The woman's jaw tightened slightly. "I'm the HOA president," she said, as if that explained everything. "When I drive down this street I should see harmony, not chaos. Those colors clash with the neighborhood aesthetic." She set her mug down carefully on the small table beside her chair. "I respect your role," she said, "but aesthetic preferences aren't enforceable rules. If the board wants to change the covenants they can propose an amendment. Until then my porch is my decision." "This isn't about what you decide," the woman said, her voice rising just enough to carry across the quiet street. "It's about what's right for everyone. One person's choices affect all of us. Property values matter." "Property values matter," she agreed, "but so does the right to enjoy your own home. I'm not putting up neon signs or storing junk cars. I'm growing flowers. My grandmother grew flowers on her porch in Alabama. It's a tradition in my family." The woman stared at her as if she had spoken in another language. "Traditions don't appear in the covenants," she said finally. "Monday morning those pots better be gone or there will be consequences." She watched the woman walk away, heels clicking on the pavement, back straight, shoulders tight. She felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the kind she had learned to recognize over the years. It was the feeling of being measured against a standard she never agreed to. The feeling of having to explain her humanity to someone who saw her as a problem to be solved. She took a slow breath, let it out. She would not remove the pots. Not because she enjoyed conflict, but because some lines once crossed teach people where the next line will be. Sunday morning arrived warm and bright. She was on her knees by the porch steps, repotting a fern that had outgrown its container. Soil dusted her hands. The radio played softly from inside the house, a Sunday morning gospel program her mother used to love. She was humming along when she heard the gate click open. She looked up and saw the HOA president walking toward her carrying a large white bucket. The woman's face was set in hard lines. She did not slow her pace as she crossed onto the porch, the wood groaning slightly under her quick steps. "Please leave," she said, standing now, wiping her hands on her gardening apron. "You're on my property without permission." "This ends today," the woman said, her voice tight with something that looked like anger but felt like fear. She took a step back instinctively. "Put the bucket down and leave right now, or I'm calling the police." The woman's arms tensed. "You think rules don't apply to you just because you smile and quote paragraphs? You think your little pots are worth dragging everyone else down?" She was no longer just a neighbor enforcing rules. She was a person carrying a bucket of paint toward another person standing on her own porch. The situation had shifted from disagreement to danger. She reached for her phone in her apron pocket. The woman swung the bucket forward, not with dramatic flair but with a sharp, angry motion born of frustration and entitlement. Thick white paint arced through the air, splattering across the porch railing, the flower pots, the welcome mat, the steps. A wave of it caught the front of her apron, splashing warm and heavy against her legs. The ceramic frog disappeared under a coat of white. The purple petunias bowed under the weight of the paint droplets. The smell of fresh latex filled the air, sharp and chemical. For a moment there was only silence, except for the slow drip, drip, drip of paint hitting the wooden planks. "You just vandalized my home," she said, her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. The woman stood, breathing heavily, staring at what she had done as if seeing it for the first time. "It was just paint," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "It washes off. It does not wash off from ceramic, it does not wash off from living flowers, it does not wash off from the feeling of standing on your own property and having someone throw something at you without consent." She held up her phone, the screen lit with 911 already dialed. "You need to leave now," she said, "and stay off my property. The police are coming. What you did was criminal mischief. It was trespassing. It was assault. You threw a heavy bucket toward a person. If that paint had hit my eyes, I could have been blinded." The woman's face crumpled, not with remorse but with the sudden understanding of consequence. She dropped the empty bucket with a clatter and hurried down the steps, not looking back. Her car started a moment later, tires spitting gravel as she sped away. She stood on her paint-spattered porch, watching white droplets slide down the railing like slow tears. She did not cry. She took pictures with her phone, methodical, careful, documenting every angle. She noted the time, the license plate, the direction the woman had driven. She had spent her career teaching juries to see facts, not emotions. Now she applied that same discipline to her own life. When the police arrived, she spoke calmly, clearly, giving statements without embellishment. She showed them the covenants, the note, the photographs. She did not mention race. She did not need to. The facts stood on their own: a woman crossing property lines with a bucket of paint, throwing it on another woman's home. The officers took notes, their faces serious. They said they would file a report. They said charges would likely be pressed. As they left, one officer paused at the bottom of the steps. "You okay, ma'am?" he asked, genuine concern in his eyes. She looked at her ruined flowers, at the white paint drying in the sun, at her grandmother's frog buried under a coat of someone else's anger. Then she looked at her house, solid and true behind her. "Yes," she said, "I'm okay. This is still my home. Paint doesn't change that." She went inside, washed the paint from her arms and legs. She changed her clothes. Then she sat at her kitchen table and opened her laptop. Monday morning she had court. A full docket. One case involved a woman charged with criminal mischief and trespassing. She had not yet reviewed the file. She did not know the defendant's name. She only knew that justice required seeing people clearly, seeing actions clearly, and never confusing power with rightness. She saved the police report number in her phone. She made a note to contact a restoration company about the porch. She watered the flowers that had survived mostly untouched in the back garden. And she waited for Monday, knowing that some circles close faster than we expect, knowing that the world has a way of bringing people face to face with the consequences of their choices, often when they least expect it. The sun moved across the sky. The paint dried hard and chalky on the wood. But the house stood. The owner stood. And somewhere not far away, a woman who thought rules applied only to others was about to learn that every action, no matter how small, carries weight enough to tip the scales. Morning after the paint incident arrived, quiet and ordinary. Birds sang in the oak trees. A newspaper thumped softly against the driveway pavement. The world had not ended, though it felt like it should have. She woke before her alarm, body already humming with tension. She dressed carefully in her judge's robe, later would be navy suit, crisp white blouse, low heels that would not click too loudly on courthouse marble. She made coffee the same way she always did, 2 scoops per cup, hot water poured slow. She sat at her kitchen table and opened the case file for the day. State vs. Croft, criminal mischief, trespassing, assault with a dangerous weapon. The defendant, Barbara Croft, age 58, president of the Oak Haven Heights Homeowners Association. The victim's statement described a woman gardening on her own porch when another woman approached with a 5-gallon bucket of paint and threw its contents across the porch area, damaging property and causing reasonable fear of physical harm. Security camera footage from a neighbor confirmed the account. The police report noted white latex paint on the victim's clothing, porch railing, flower pots and welcome mat. Estimated damages $1,200. She read the file twice, hands steady, eyes scanning each line for bias, for assumption, for anything that might cloud judgment. She found none. The facts were plain. A person entered another person's property without permission and threw paint. This was not a dispute over aesthetics. This was an action with consequence. She closed the folder, made a note to speak with her clerk about potential recusal if she recognized the defendant. She had never recused herself from a case lightly, but ethics demanded it. When personal involvement could appear to influence judgment. The courthouse stood 3 stories tall, brick and glass, built in the 1980s, with wide hallways and benches worn smooth by years of waiting. People. She parked in her assigned spot, walked through the metal detector, nodded to the bailiff who had worked these halls longer than she had. She entered her chambers, hung her coat on the wooden stand behind the door and sat at her desk. The clerk arrived promptly. 9:15. Files organized in a leather portfolio. Your Honor, the clerk said, we have State vs. Croft first on the docket. The defendant is already here with counsel. They're requesting a plea hearing rather than a trial. She nodded. Thank you. She reviewed the file once more, then stood, straightened her jacket and walked into the courtroom. The wood floor creaked under her feet. The air carried the faint smell of lemon cleaner and old paper. She took her seat behind the bench, adjusted the microphone and looked out at the room. The defendant sat at the table closest to the bench, back straight, hands folded on the surface. She wore the same crisp linen pants from 2 days before, though now they looked rumpled. Her hair was less perfect, strands escaping the sharp bob. She stared at the table surface, not yet looking up. The bailiff called the case State vs. Croft. All rise. Everyone stood. She settled into her chair and began the formalities. Ms. Croft, you are charged with criminal mischief in the 2nd degree, trespassing and assault with a dangerous weapon. How do you plead? The woman lifted her head and their eyes met. Recognition flashed first in the defendant's face, then in hers. The HOA president, the woman with the paint bucket, sat now in the defendant chair facing the woman she had painted 2 days earlier. The woman she had called a problem to be solved now wore a black robe and held a gavel. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. No one moved. The clerk's pen hovered above paper. The defense attorney shifted in his seat. "Your Honor," the defendant whispered, her voice thin as paper. I didn't know." She felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders, heavy but not crushing. She had spent 20 years learning to separate emotion from judgment, to see the human being inside the legal file. This was the test of everything she believed about justice. "I am Judge Vasquez," she said, her voice even calm. "I am also the victim in this case. I reviewed this file blind yesterday before learning the defendant's identity. I have not spoken to prosecutors about strategy. I have not prejudged the outcome. However, ethics require transparency. I must ask Ms. Croft and her counsel, do you wish me to recuse myself from this case?" The defense attorney leaned toward his client. They whispered quickly. The defendant shook her head once, then twice more firmly. She looked up at the bench, tears glistening but not falling. "No, Your Honor," she said softly. "I don't want you to step aside. I need to face what I did. I need to face you." The attorney nodded. "Your Honor, my client waives any objection to you presiding. She believes accountability requires looking the person she harmed directly in the eye. She considered this carefully. The law allowed a judge to remain on a case if both parties consented. After full disclosure, she had seen no threat, no coercion, only a woman realizing the depth of her mistake. "Very well," she said, "we will proceed, but understand this, Ms. Croft. My role here is not personal, it is institutional. I will apply the law fairly, without favor toward myself or leniency toward you. The fact that I stand on both sides of this case, victim and judge, means I must be more careful, not less, about impartiality. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor." "How do you plead?" "Guilty, Your Honor," the defendant said, the words barely audible but clear. "Guilty to all charges." The courtroom exhaled softly, a collective release of tension. She nodded to the prosecutor, who stood and summarized the state's position. The evidence was strong: video footage, witness statements, physical evidence. The state recommended standard sentencing for first-time offenders: 200 hours community service, $500 fine, anger management counseling. She turned to the defense attorney. "Any statement before sentencing?" The attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client has no prior record. She has served this community for 12 years as an HOA volunteer. She made a terrible, impulsive decision born of frustration, not malice. She has already begun making amends. She contacted a professional cleaning service last night to restore the victim's porch at her own expense. She has resigned her position as HOA president. She understands now that leadership requires respect, not control." She looked at the defendant. "Ms. Croft, before I sentence you, I must hear from you directly. Why did you do it? What did you think would happen when you carried that bucket onto another person's property?" The woman swallowed hard. Her hands trembled on the table. "I thought I was protecting the neighborhood," she began, voice shaking. "I thought rules were being broken and someone had to enforce them. I didn't see you as a person. I saw you as a violation, a problem that needed fixing. When you wouldn't listen, I felt powerless, so I tried to take power back. I thought paint was harmless, it washes off. I didn't think about your shoes, your flowers, your sense of safety. I didn't think about you at all, and that was my real crime." The words hung in the air, simple, honest, heavy with regret. She had heard many apologies in this courtroom, some polished by attorneys, some rehearsed for effect. This one felt raw, unvarnished, true. "You are correct," she said. "The paint itself was not the deepest harm. The deepest harm was the message you sent, that your preferences mattered more than another person's right to exist peacefully in her own home, that your vision of order justified violating someone else's sanctuary. That is not leadership, Ms. Croft, that is domination dressed up as care." She paused, letting the words settle. "I sentence you to 200 hours of community service, not with an HOA but with Habitat for Humanity, working alongside people building their first homes, people who understand what it means to have a door you can close against the world. I order full restitution for all damages, including replacement of damaged personal items like the ceramic frog your paint covered. I require you to attend 6 sessions of restorative justice training to learn the difference between enforcing rules and respecting humans. She leaned forward slightly. And I require one more thing before this case closes. You will attend the next Oak Haven Heights HOA meeting and read a statement acknowledging your mistake, not as a legal requirement but as a human one. You will say aloud that every homeowner deserves dignity regardless of flowerpot color or porch decoration. You will say that rules exist to protect community, not to erase individuality. The defendant nodded, tears finally falling, but she did not wipe them away. Let them fall. Is there anything else you wish to say to me now, not as judge to defendant but as one person to another? The woman looked up, eyes red but clear. I am sorry, she said. I am sorry I didn't see you. I am sorry I thought my comfort mattered more than your safety. I am sorry I used a bucket of paint to say what I could not say with words. I hope one day you can believe I am truly sorry. She felt something shift inside, not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of it. Justice was not about revenge, it was about repair, about creating conditions where harm could transform into understanding. The sentence is recorded, she said. The clerk will provide details for fulfilling these requirements. This case is adjourned. The gavel tapped, one soft, decisive final. As people gathered their papers and stood to leave, the defendant remained seated, head bowed. The judge rose from the bench and walked slowly down the steps of the platform. She stopped beside the defendant's table, not too close, not invading space, but near enough for quiet words. Look at me, she said gently. The woman lifted her head. What you did was wrong, she said, but you are not beyond repair. Most people who cause harm believe they are justified in the moment. Accountability begins when we see the human cost of our actions. You took that step today, that matters. Thank you, the woman whispered. Don't thank me, she said. Thank the part of yourself that chose honesty over excuse. That is the part that will rebuild what was broken. She turned and walked back toward the bench, toward her chambers, toward the next case waiting in the docket. But something had changed in the room, something had changed in her. The circle had closed, not with punishment alone but with the hard, fragile beginning of understanding. Paint could be washed away, wood could be repainted, flowers could be replanted, but the moment two people truly saw each other, that could not be undone. And sometimes that was where healing began, not in forgetting but in facing what we have done and choosing to do better next time. The courthouse clock ticked forward, the day continued, but a small piece of the world had shifted, just enough to let light through it. A days after, the courtroom stretched long and quiet for the woman who had thrown the paint. She woke each morning to a house that felt too large, too silent. The resignation letter to the HOA board sat sent in her email outbox. Her phone no longer buzzed with complaints about trash cans or fence heights. The power she had carried for 12 years had evaporated, leaving a hollow space in her chest. She stared at her hands, the same hands that had gripped the bucket handle, the same hands that had swung it forward in anger. She flexed her fingers, wondering how something so ordinary could do something so wrong. Her attorney had given her the details: Habitat for Humanity, Tuesdays and Saturdays, 8 hours each day for the next 6 weeks. She put on work pants, old sneakers, a t-shirt she hadn't worn in years, and drove to the construction site on the edge of town. The air smelled of sawdust and fresh earth. Volunteers milled about, carrying lumber, hammering nails, laughing easily with one another. She stood at the edge of the property, feeling like an imposter. Someone had given her a hammer, a tool belt, a hard hat that felt too heavy on her head. A woman with silver streaks in her braids and strong arms covered in faded tattoos approached her. You here for Habitat? She asked, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist. Yes, the woman said. I was ordered to do community service. The volunteer nodded, no judgment in her eyes, just acceptance. Okay, well, grab a hammer and follow Maria. She pointed toward a half-built wall where a stout woman with a measuring tape around her neck directed a small crew. You'll learn fast, everyone does. She spent the morning holding boards steady while others hammered. Her arms ached, her back stiffened, but no one complained, no one snapped at her for holding the wood at the wrong angle. Maria simply showed her again, your left hand here, not there. Good, now hold firm. She did as instructed. The rhythm of hammering became meditative. Tap, 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 a sound of building, not destroying. At lunch break, volunteers gathered under a pop-up tent, sharing sandwiches, chips, bottles of water. Someone offered her a cookie. She accepted, murmuring thanks. The conversation flowed around her, easy, unforced. They talked about their kids, their jobs, the stubbornness of drywall, the joy of seeing a roof go on. They did not ask about her crime. They did not treat her like a criminal. They treated her like another pair of hands needed to build something good. That afternoon Maria assigned her to help install insulation. Pink fluffy material that clung to her clothes made her itch, but she worked steadily, pulling sections to fit between wall studs. A young man named Devin worked beside her, barely 19, with quick hands and a ready smile. He showed her how to tuck the edges neatly so no gaps remained. "My auntie gets this house," he said, voice soft with pride. 3 kids, 2 bedrooms, a real kitchen with a window over the sink. She been saving for years, working 2 jobs. You ever see someone so happy about a window? She looked at him, really looked at him, saw the pride in his eyes, the love for his auntie. She thought of her own porch, the paint splattered flowers, the ceramic frog buried under white. She had been so angry about flower pots, while this woman dreamed of a window over a sink. "No," she said, "I haven't." Devin smiled like he knew something she didn't. "Everyone deserves a place that feels like theirs," he said. "Doesn't matter if it's fancy or plain, just has to be yours, you know." The words settled deep in her chest, a truth so simple she had forgotten it entirely. She had spent years policing other people's spaces, their colors, their decorations, their very right to express themselves on their own property, all while believing she was protecting something sacred, when really she had been protecting her own narrow vision of order. Friday evening she drove to the hardware store, bought supplies: white paint stripper, gentle soap, soft brushes, a new ceramic frog painted blue like the one she had ruined. She drove to the judge's house, parked down the street, walked slowly to the porch. The paint from her bucket had been mostly removed, but faint stains remained on the wood grain. The flower pots held new plants: purple petunias, red geraniums, vibrant and alive. She set the bag of supplies on the welcome mat along with a handwritten note. "I am sorry for the harm I caused. I am learning what respect really means." She did not ring the bell. She did not wait for a response. She simply left the offering and walked away. Saturday morning she returned to the habitat site. This time she arrived early, helped unload lumber from a delivery truck. Her muscles protested, but she kept moving. At midday she sat with Devin, sharing a bag of oranges. He peeled one, handed her a section. "You seem different today," he said. "How so?" "Less stiff, like you're breathing now." She laughed, a real laugh that surprised her. "I spent a long time believing I had to control things to keep them good. I was wrong." "Control ain't the same as care," he said, wiping juice from his chin. "My mama taught me that you can love a garden without yanking every weed the second it shows up. Some things need room to grow even if they're messy." She thought of the judge's porch, the joyful chaos of colors, the ceramic frog nestled between pots, not perfect, not uniform, but alive, full of memory and love. She had seen disorder where there was only humanity. Monday morning the judge arrived at her chambers early, the sun just breaking over the courthouse roof. She had received the bag from her porch, the supplies, the note. She had read the words 3 times, not because she needed convincing, but because she wanted to feel their weight. The apology had not been required by the court, it had been offered freely. That made all the difference. Her clerk entered with the day's docket, a light schedule, mostly civil matters, one small claims case about a broken fence between neighbors. She reviewed the file: 2 homeowners arguing over responsibility for repairs, each blaming the other for neglect. She closed the folder and stood walking to the courthouse mediation room where the neighbors waited separately. She did not sit at the head of the table as a judge might. Instead, she pulled a chair to the side and spoke to each person alone. First, the woman who claimed the fence leaned onto her property, threatening her rose bushes. Then the man who insisted the original installation was faulty, not his maintenance. When she brought them together, she did not focus on property lines or municipal codes. She asked different questions. What did you love about this neighborhood when you first moved here? What would a good resolution feel like, not just look like? How can we fix the fence and keep your friendship intact? The woman spoke of evening walks, the man of his daughter learning to ride a bike between their yards. They had been friends for 7 years. The fence dispute had lasted 3 months, but the friendship was older, stronger. They had simply forgotten how to see each other past the anger. An hour later they left with a plan. The man would repair the fence, the woman would share her rose cuttings for his garden, they would split the cost of new posts. They shook hands, not stiffly but with warmth. Back in her chambers, the judge sipped cold coffee and thought about power. Real power was not controlling others, it was creating conditions where people could find their own way back to each other. The HOA president had believed power meant enforcing rules. The judge believed power meant holding space for repair. That afternoon a letter arrived from Habitat for Humanity thanking her for the defendant's dedicated service, noting her willingness to learn, her humility, her strong work ethic. The coordinator wrote, "She asks thoughtful questions about homeownership. She listens more than she speaks. She seems to be finding something here." The judge read the letter twice, then filed it away, not as evidence but as hope. Wednesday, the HOA president arrived at the construction site before anyone else. She swept the ground around the foundation, cleared away debris left from the weekend when volunteers arrived. She had coffee ready in a large thermos and clean rags for wiping sawdust from tools. Maria raised an eyebrow, then nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of change. As they worked on interior walls framing out rooms that would become bedrooms, kitchens, living spaces, the HOA president found herself watching the future homeowners who visited the site, a single mother pointing to where the stove would go, her eyes bright with possibility, an elderly couple holding hands as they measured a windowsill discussing curtain colors, a young family with 2 small children, the boy running his fingers along the fresh wood whispering, "This is my room, this is really my room." She felt something break open inside her, not painfully but like a seed cracking to let green through. She had spent years focused on surfaces, on appearances, on the way things looked from the street, but these people, they cared about light through a window, space for a dining table, room for a child to play. They cared about sanctuary, not symmetry. At the end of the day, as she packed her tools, Devon approached her. "Hey, my auntie's house, the one going up next block over. She invited everyone to a small gathering Saturday before the final walkthrough. You should come." She blinked, surprised me. "Yeah, you helped build her wall. Seems right. You see the whole thing finished." "I would like that," she said, and meant it. Thursday evening she sat at her kitchen table drafting the statement she would read at the HOA meeting next week. She wrote, then crossed out, then wrote again. The words would not come easily. She wanted them true, not polished, not performative. She thought of Devon's words, "Control ain't the same as care." She thought of the judge's quiet strength in the courtroom. She thought of the single mother's eyes lighting up at the thought of a window over the sink. Finally she wrote this: "I believed rules were about control. I was wrong. Rules should be about care. Care for each other, care for our shared spaces, care for the dignity of every person who calls this neighborhood home. I violated that care. I am sorry. I am learning better. I hope you will learn with me." She read the words aloud to her empty kitchen. They felt small against the size of her mistake, but they were honest, and that was a beginning. Friday morning she woke before dawn, drove to a nursery, bought new plants, purple petunias, red geraniums, a small blue ceramic frog. She arranged them carefully in her trunk, then drove to the judge's house. This time she did not leave them anonymously. She walked to the door and rang the bell. When the judge answered, she did not speak first. She simply held out the plants, the frog. The judge looked at the offering, then at her face, then back at the plants. After a long moment she stepped aside. "Come in," she said, "let's talk." And for the first time in weeks the HOA president felt not the weight of punishment but the lightness of a door opening, not closed, not fixed, not yet, but opening, and that was enough for now. The judge stepped back from the doorway and the woman who had thrown the paint walked inside for the first time, not as an intruder but as a guest. The house smelled of lemon polish and something sweet baking in the oven. Sunlight streamed through the living room window, catching dust motes dancing in the air. It was a home, not just a property, a place where life happened. "Please sit," the judge said, gesturing to a sofa covered in soft fabric patterned with flowers, not the stiff formal furniture the woman had expected. She perched on the edge of the cushion, hands folded in her lap. The judge sat opposite, not behind a desk, not elevated, just 2 people in a room. "You brought flowers," she said, nodding toward the plants still cradled in the woman's arms. "I ruined yours," the woman replied. "My apology felt too small. Words on paper don't fix what I broke, so I brought new ones, and this." She held out the blue ceramic frog, its paint glossy in the light. "I remembered your niece gave you the other one. I thought maybe this could sit beside it when the time is right." The judge took the frog, turning it slowly in her hands. "Its weight small but real." She set it gently on the coffee table between them, a bridge not yet crossed but acknowledged. "Why are you here?" the judge asked, not unkindly, not as a judge but as a person. The woman looked down at her hands, the same hands that had gripped the bucket, the same hands that had held a hammer building walls for strangers. "I spent my whole life believing order came from control," she began, voice low. "If everything looked the same, followed the same rules, stayed in its place, then nothing could go wrong. I thought I was protecting something valuable, but I was really just protecting my own fear." What were you afraid of? That things would fall apart. She said that if one person put out purple flowers, then someone else might paint their door neon green, then someone might park a trailer in their driveway, and suddenly the neighborhood wouldn't feel safe anymore, wouldn't feel like a place where I belonged. But I see now that safety doesn't come from sameness, it comes from respect, and I didn't show you respect. I didn't even see you as someone deserving of it. The judge was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a car passed slowly, its tires humming on pavement. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Ordinary sounds of an ordinary afternoon. I grew up in a neighborhood where people watched each other, she said, not with suspicion but with care. Mrs. Jenkins next door would leave plates of food on our step when my mother worked late. Mr. Rodriguez would shovel our walk before we woke up. We didn't have covenants or HOA boards, we had each other, and yes, sometimes someone's lawn grew too long or their kid left toys in the street, but we talked, we helped, we didn't punish, we built community, not compliance. The woman felt tears gather, but she let them stay. She had cried enough tears of shame, now she needed to hold space for something else, understanding maybe. I never had that, she admitted. My childhood was quiet, orderly, distant. My father was a lawyer, my mother a realtor. Rules were everything, feelings were messy, inconvenient. I learned early that following rules perfectly was the way to be valued, so when I became HOA president it felt like coming home, finally a place where I could enforce the order I craved. And when I didn't comply, you became the crack in my perfect picture, the woman said honestly. You smiled when you should have been apologetic. You quoted covenants back to me when I expected submission. You were kind but unmovable, and that kindness felt like defiance because I didn't know how to handle someone who was both gentle and firm. I had only ever known power as domination, not as strength with compassion. The judge nodded slowly. That is a hard lesson to learn, especially when you've built your identity around being the enforcer. I know now that what I did was about more than flowerpots, the woman continued. It was about who gets to decide what belongs, who gets to define beauty, who gets to feel at home on their own porch. I assumed that right belonged to me because of my position, because of my years in the neighborhood, because of the color of my skin, though I would never have admitted that then. I see it now. I saw your blackness before I saw your humanity, and that is the deepest shame of all. The words hung in the air, not as an accusation but as a confession. The judge did not flinch, did not soften the truth with empty comfort. Thank you for saying that aloud, the judge said. Many people never get that far, they stop at I was stressed or I made a mistake, but you named the real harm, the assumption that some people must shrink themselves to make others comfortable. That is what needs to change, not just in HOAs but everywhere. What do I do now? The woman asked. The sentence is being served, the restitution paid, but I feel like the real work is just beginning. The judge leaned forward slightly. Restorative justice isn't about checking boxes, it is about changing hearts, starting with your own. You have already begun by showing up here, by listening, by seeing the harm clearly. Now you carry that awareness into every interaction you have. You question your assumptions, you ask before you judge. You remember that every person you meet has a story, a home, a right to exist without apology. They sat together as afternoon light shifted across the floorboards. The judge made tea in mismatched mugs. They talked not as victim and offender but as two women navigating the messy work of repair. The woman shared stories of her lonely childhood. The judge spoke of her mother's hands worn from factory work, saving every dollar for a better life. They found no easy answers, but they found something rarer: understanding. Saturday morning arrived bright and warm. The woman drove to the habitat site, her body still aching from weeks of labor but her spirit lighter. Devon greeted her with a grin. My auntie is gonna lose her mind when she sees the kitchen come on. The future home stood complete, walls painted, floors laid, light fixtures waiting for bulbs. Volunteers gathered in the driveway holding paper plates and folding chairs. The single mother arrived with her 3 children, the youngest clutching a stuffed rabbit. She walked through each room slowly, trailing her fingers along freshly painted walls. This is mine, she whispered, not loudly but with a certainty that filled the space. The woman watched as the family explored their new home, the boy claiming his bedroom, the girls debating who got the window seat, the mother standing in the kitchen, her hands resting on the empty counter where one day a window would look out over a small garden. She caught the woman's eye and smiled, a real smile, not polite, not performative, but warm. Thank you, the mother said simply, for helping build this. The woman felt her throat tighten. I should be thanking you, she replied, for letting me be part of it. Devon handed out slices of cake store-bought but celebratory. They sat on upturned buckets eating with plastic forks, talking about nothing important, the weather, the kids' school starting soon, a funny story about a misbehaving dog, and in that ordinary moment the woman understood what she had been missing all those years spent enforcing rules. She had forgotten how to simply be with people, how to share cake on a sunny afternoon, how to celebrate someone else's joy without measuring it against her own standards. Sunday evening she sat at her kitchen table drafting her statement for the HOA meeting, not the stiff formal version she had written before but something truer. She wrote about the single mother touching her kitchen counter. She wrote about Devon's wisdom about control not being the same as care. She wrote about the blue ceramic frog sitting now on the judge's coffee table, a small symbol of repair. She wrote about learning that home is not a concept to be policed but a feeling to be protected for everyone. Monday morning she arrived early at the community center where the HOA meetings were held. She arranged chairs not in rigid rows but in a loose circle. She placed a small vase with one sunflower on the center table, a splash of gold against the beige walls. Neighbors began to arrive, some nodding stiffly, others avoiding her gaze. She did not force conversation, she simply made coffee and set out cups. The judge arrived quietly, taking a seat near the back, not as an authority figure but as a neighbor. The woman felt a surge of gratitude, not for forgiveness but for presence. As the meeting began, the woman stood before the room, not behind a podium but among them. She held her handwritten pages but did not read them. She looked at the faces around her, some familiar, some new, all waiting. "I have something to say," she began, her voice steady. "I came to this neighborhood 12 years ago looking for order. I found it in rules, in guidelines, in enforcement, but I was looking in the wrong place. Order doesn't come from making everyone the same, it comes from honoring each person's right to create a home that reflects who they are. I failed at that spectacularly. I hurt someone deeply. I violated a sacred space, a porch where a woman should feel safe. I am here not to ask for your forgiveness but to commit to doing better, to learning that leadership means lifting others up, not cutting them down, to remembering that every door on this street opens into a life full of memories, hopes, and the simple human need to belong." She paused, letting the words settle. The room was quiet, no one shifted, no one whispered. "I invite you to join me in building a different kind of community, one where we ask before we judge, where we see flowerpots as joy, not violations, where we protect each other, not just property values, because at the end of the day that is what we all want, isn't it, to feel at home." She sat down, heart pounding, not from fear but from release. The room remained silent for 3 long breaths, then one person began to clap, then another, until the sound filled the space, not thunderous but steady, real. After the meeting, neighbors approached her not with anger but with curiosity. One man admitted he had argued with his wife about holiday lights for years. Another woman shared how she always hid her vibrant garden behind a fence, fearing complaints. They talked not as rule followers but as people discovering they had more in common than they knew. The judge approached as the room emptied. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank you for letting me try," the woman replied. "We all get to try," she said, "as long as we are willing to see clearly and change when we are wrong." They walked out of the community center together, not as friends, not yet, but as two people who had faced a hard truth together and chosen to walk forward rather than apart. The evening air was cool against their skin, stars beginning to appear one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere down the street a porch light glowed warm and steady, a beacon saying, "Come home, you belong here."